The fire had burned down to a low, stubborn core, the kind that throws more shadow than light. I'd been talking for a while, long enough that the night had settled into that heavy stillness where even your own breathing feels too loud. The faces across from me were mostly dim shapes, but I could feel their attention like hands on my shoulders. Someone shifted on the log opposite me. I heard the scrape of a boot against gravel, then a voice I hadn't expected to interrupt. "I don't believe you, Ethan," the man said. He sounded younger than me, but not by much, and there was a hard edge to the way he tried to make it casual. "I don't believe you just walked away from the rescue group. You wouldn't be you if you didn't try to figure it out." For a second, I didn't answer. I watched a coal brighten and then dull again, like an eye blinking. The forest beyond our little circle of warmth didn't move, didn't whisper. It just waited. "You're right," I said finally. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. I told people it was burnout, because that's the kind of word that closes conversations. It's a neat box. It doesn't invite follow-up questions. But that night didn't end when we carried her out. It only stopped being public. I rubbed my thumb along the seam of my glove, a habit left over from those searches, and I could almost feel wet pine needles again. For weeks afterward, I kept replaying the timeline, the distance, the footprints, the way the forest seemed to exhale when we left. I wrote everything down in a notebook like it was a case file. I called it The Girl in the Creek. I let out a humorless breath, like giving it a name would make it behave. The man across the fire, Max, someone had called him earlier, leaned forward. The light caught his cheekbone and then vanished as the flame shifted. "So what did you do?" he asked. "What I always do when something doesn't add up," I said. I looked for the person who had to know more than the rest of us, the sheriff. I hadn't met him during the search. That night was chaos and procedure, and law enforcement had kept to their own perimeter while we worked ours. But his name had been on the incident paperwork. Sheriff Halverson. Small county, big forest, too many miles of nothing to patrol, and not enough deputies to do it. The kind of man who wore exhaustion like a badge and called it duty. I didn't go to him, though. He came to me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes every surface look bruised. I was sitting on the back steps of my apartment building, staring at my phone without seeing it, when a dark SUV rolled up and parked, like it belonged there. A man got out, broad shoulders under a rain jacket, and walked straight toward me, as if we'd already agreed on the meeting. "Ethan?" he asked. I stood. "Yeah." He showed me his badge without flourish, then tucked it away. "Sheriff Halverson, mind if I talk to you?" His voice wasn't friendly or hostile. It was practical, like a tool. I remember thinking, absurdly, that he smelled like damp wool and coffee. Real things, grounding things. I nodded, and he sat beside me on the step, as if we were two men waiting for a bus. "You left the volunteer group," he said. It wasn't a question. "Taking a break," I lied automatically. He didn't react, just watched the street like he expected something to cross it. "Things have been happening out there," he said. "The kind of things that don't make the papers because no one wants tourists spooked." That word, out there, made my stomach tighten. It didn't mean a place. It meant an idea, a territory where rules got thin. He pulled a folder from under his jacket and opened it on his knee. Photos, glossy and wet at the corners. He held the first one where I could see it. A deer, or what was left of one. The body had been opened in a way that didn't look like feeding. It looked like someone had searched inside it and gotten bored. The edges weren't chewed. They were torn, twisted, wrong. "Coyotes?" I said, though I already knew the answer. Halverson shook his head slowly. "We've had coyotes here my whole career. I know what they do. This isn't it." He turned to the next photo. A rabbit, split clean, but the fur hadn't been disturbed. A strip of hide peeled back like a glove. No tracks around it but hoof prints, and something else, pressed too deep into the mud to be rabbit or deer. He turned another. A raccoon up in a tree, hanging by one leg, as if it had been placed there, as if something had wanted it displayed. "People?" I asked. He looked at me then, directly, and the rain made tiny dark freckles on his eyelashes. "If it's people, they're doing it without leaving evidence. And if it's not people..." He didn't finish. I watched the photos and felt that same sensation from the search night, the one I hated admitting even to myself. The feeling of being studied by something that didn't need eyes. Halverson closed the folder. "You were on that search," he said. "You heard what they said. The voice, the footprints, the way she was found." I swallowed. "Yeah. Since then, hikers have reported hearing their names called," he continued. "A kid swears his dead grandfather was whistling from the trees. A couple on a trail heard a woman crying and went off path to help. They got turned around for 5 hours in a forest they've walked a dozen times." "And you want me to what?" I asked. "Tell you it's a bear?" He almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I want you to come out with me tonight. Patrol. Just 2 sets of eyes, 2 radios. If something's there, I'd rather see it with someone who doesn't flinch at the dark." I should have said no. I'd already told myself I was done. I'd already built the neat box labeled burnout. But boxes are for things that stay still, and that case file in my head never stopped moving. It tugged at me when I tried to sleep. It turned my dreams into maps with missing roads. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Tonight." We met at the sheriff's office after sunset. He gave me a spare jacket with the county emblem on the sleeve, not because I needed it, but because he wanted me to look like I belonged. We drove out in his SUV, headlights cutting through thin fog, the forest rising on both sides like a wall that had been waiting for us. He didn't talk much, neither did I. There are silences that feel comfortable. This wasn't one of them. This silence was something we were both holding, like a door against a wind. We stopped at an old access road, the kind used for logging decades ago and then abandoned. The trees had begun reclaiming it, their branches knitting overhead. Halverson killed the engine, and the sudden quiet pressed in. "Radio check," he said. "Good," I replied. We walked. Our boots made soft, damp sounds on moss and old gravel. My headlamp beams swung with each step, catching ferns, roots, the pale underside of mushrooms. The forest smelled like wet earth and decay, but underneath it was something else. Something faint and metallic, like a storm that hadn't arrived yet. We found the doe around midnight. It lay in a shallow dip beside the road, half concealed by brush, but the sight of it hit like a fist. The body was intact in the way a body can be intact while still being ruined. The ribs were visible through torn flesh. The stomach had been opened, but not eaten. The ground around it showed no frenzy, no scattered prints, just one set of hoof marks leading in, circling once, and then stopping, as if the deer had walked there and decided to die. Halverson crouched, his face hard in the light. "This is the third one this week," he said. I didn't answer. I was staring at the dirt just beyond the carcass, where the mud held impressions like memory. There were shallow boot prints, old, animal tracks, small, and then something pressed deep, long and narrow, like a heel without a foot. It made no sense. "We should mark this," and Halverson began. My radio crackled before he could finish. A voice came through, distorted by static. "Sheriff, we've got missing again." Halverson stood so fast, his knee brushed the carcass. "Say again," he snapped into the radio. The voice returned, clearer this time, and my stomach went cold before the words even arrived, because I recognized the pattern, the way bad news tries to be careful with you. "Girl missing from Camp Alder," the deputy said. "She walked off about 15 minutes ago. Same story. They said she heard someone calling." Halverson looked at me. I didn't need him to ask. My body had already decided. The forest had already pulled the thread. We drove like we had chased something before and didn't want it to get a head start. Camp Alder sat farther north, closer to the ridge line where the ground broke into cliffs and ravines. The camp was bright when we arrived, too bright. Lanterns swinging, flashlights bobbing, people clustered like frightened animals. A counselor met us at the edge of the clearing and spoke fast, eyes wide. "She just stood up," the counselor said, "right in the middle of dinner, like she heard something. She said her sister was calling her from the trees, but her sister is home. She just smiled and walked away." I heard myself asking questions again, the same ones, same procedure. What was she wearing? Did she take anything? How long ago? Which direction? I watched their mouths move and wrote a new timeline in my head, hating how familiar it felt. We didn't wait for volunteers. There wasn't time. Halverson took point, and I followed with the second headlamp, the second radio, the second set of eyes he had asked for. We found her trail fast. The ground here was softer, the pine needles thick, but the slope toward the ridge forced bare patches of damp soil into view. And there they were, footprints, light and sure. Not running, not stumbling, walking toward something. The trees thinned as we climbed. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, threading through branches like fingers. Every few minutes my radio hissed, and I caught myself listening for my name. Then I saw her. She stood at the edge of a cliff, her back to us, hair lifting in the wind. Below her was nothing but darkness and the suggestion of jagged rock. The beam of my headlamp caught her shoulders and the side of her face, and I saw she was smiling faintly, like someone listening to a lullaby. "Hey," I said, and my voice sounded too loud, too fragile in the open air. "Don't move. It's Ethan. We're here." She didn't turn. She didn't flinch. She leaned forward, just a little, like she was testing whether the air could hold her. Halverson lunged, but the gravel shifted under his boot, and he lost a half step. I didn't think. I sprinted. My hand closed around her wrist as she lifted her foot. Her skin was ice cold, colder than the night should have made it. For a moment, she didn't resist, and I felt that terrifying possibility, that she might simply keep going, dragging me with her as calmly as she'd walked from the camp. "Look at me," I said, straining to keep my voice steady. "Look at me, okay? You're safe. You're not alone." Her head tilted slightly, not toward me, but toward the trees behind us, like she was listening past my words to something better. I tightened my grip. "No," I said, harsher. No. Stay. Her lips parted, and a whisper came out, so soft I almost didn't hear it over the wind. It's right there, she murmured. What is? I asked, but she didn't answer. Her eyes finally flicked toward mine, and in them I saw the same vacant upward stare we'd found in the ravine weeks ago. That flat, open look of a person who has stepped away from herself. Halverson grabbed her other arm, and together we pulled her back from the edge. The instant her weight shifted onto solid ground, she collapsed like her bones had turned to water. She began to sob, not like fear, but like disappointment, like we'd interrupted her just before the end of a song. We dragged her away from the cliff and sat her against a tree. She shook violently, teeth chattering, eyes darting now, waking up into her own skin. Halverson spoke into his radio, voice controlled, calling for medical, calling for a team. But I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to the space just beyond our lights, because I could feel it. That same pressure in the air. That sense of a presence not approaching, not retreating. Just standing there, patient, as if it had all the time in the world to try again. The girl's sobs softened into hiccuped breaths. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared past me into the trees. It stopped, she said. I swallowed. What stopped? She looked at me, and for a second she seemed older than she should have been. The voice, she whispered. It stopped when you touched me. My skin prickled, and the night seemed to lean in. What did it say? I asked. She hesitated, as if the words were slippery. Then she spoke, and each syllable felt like a small stone dropping into deep water. It said, she murmured, that it doesn't like being interrupted. The wind gusted hard enough to make the branches creak. My headlamp beam wavered, and for an instant the trees seemed to shift in a way they shouldn't. Not moving, exactly. More like adjusting, like someone repositioning themselves in the dark. Halverson stepped closer to me, his shoulder brushing mine. Two men pretending the closeness was accidental. You hear that? He asked quietly. I listened. At first, there was only wind, distant insects, the far-off murmur of the camp below. Then, very faintly, from somewhere beyond the reach of our light, came a sound like breathing, slow, uneven, and beneath it, so soft it could have been my own thought, a voice that wasn't speaking into the radio and wasn't speaking into the air. It was speaking straight into the space behind my eyes. Ethan. I didn't turn toward it, but I felt it smiling in the dark.